Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar to discuss the Energy and Balanced Market Governance Review Committee formation. This is Christina Osborne. I work in Stakeholder Affairs. I'll be facilitating the web conference. The purpose of this call is to go over the straw proposal that we put out there and also the draft Governance Review Committee charter. Those are actually located out on the Western Energy and Balanced Market website. Go to the Initiatives tab, and if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, you'll find the materials there. So what I'll do first, before I go to the agenda, I am going to have the folks in the room introduce themselves. So starting on my left.
Jennifer Rotz.
Nikki Imam.
Peter Calusi.
This is Bert Gross. Dan Schonkweiler.
And Stacey Crowley. Thank you, everyone. Just to let you know, we are recording this session, and we are going to make that recording available out on that same web page. So look for that probably by the end of this week, early next week. So this is the agenda. Actually, Peter is going to be presenting. He's going to kind of go over the introductory, kind of just introduce the initiative or the effort, provide an overview, and then he's going to go into the details of the straw proposal for the formation of the Governance Review Committee, and then I'll go over the next steps at the end. So with that, actually, I think we have one more slide. Sorry, we did put out a straw proposal, so this is where we are in the stakeholder process, and then we'll go over the next steps at the very end. So with that, Peter.
Thank you, Christina. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. We're here today to discuss our proposal to establish a temporary EIM Governance Review Committee that would play a role in the governance review of the EIM governing body that kicked off several months ago. On April 1st, we put out a straw proposal that discusses this proposal in detail, and it includes a draft charter for the GRC. Today, I'll provide an overview of the proposal that covers 5 main areas. The first is the role of the GRC. The second, its structure. The third, the proposed scope of the GRC. Fourth is the process that will be used to form it. And 5, how the GRC will operate in practice. As the April 1st paper notes, in developing this proposal, we were not starting from scratch. We've modeled the GRC on the Transitional Committee that was established back in 2014 to help develop the governance proposal that ultimately became the current governance structure for the EIM. Based on recent stakeholder input and our own positive experience with that process, we're now proposing a similar committee that will participate in developing any potential refinements to the current EIM governance. And as well, we'd like to note that many stakeholders have expressed support for establishing a GRC. The role of the GRC will be to develop, through an iterative stakeholder process, a proposal for any potential refinements or enhancements to the existing EIM governance based on experience to date. The GRC will do this by developing a series of issue papers and straw proposals. Similar to issue papers and straw proposals, the ISO staff puts out on a regular basis as part of its stakeholder process. Each paper will be put out to the public for stakeholder input and comment, just like the straw proposal being presented here today. As with the Transitional Committee, ISO staff will provide support and guidance to the GRC, but the content of the papers and proposals will be established by the GRC. Once the GRC has completed the iterative stakeholder process, it will then develop what will hopefully be a consensus proposal for consideration by both the EIM governing body and the ISO board. Moving on to slide 6, we'll talk about the GRC structure. We're proposing a GRC with a total of 11 to 13 different members, including 1 member of the Board of Governors, 1 member of the EIM governing body, and 1 member of the body of state regulators. It's helpful to note that the Board of Governors, EIM governing body, and body of state regulator members will each be selected by the representative body. As the paper notes, we'll need to confirm with the body of state regulators whether or not they would like to have a member serve on the GRC. The remaining 8 to 10 members will be selected by the Board of Governors and the EIM governing body from a ranked list of candidates developed through a sector-based stakeholder nominating and ranking process that I'll go over here in just a few moments. The draft charter outlines in detail a list of qualifications and experience that should be considered in identifying potential candidates for the GRC. It also includes general guidance that the GRC as a whole shall have geographic diversity and will reflect the broad range of stakeholder and industry sectors that are involved in the energy imbalance market. We're not, however, proposing any prescriptive rules regarding the type or number of members who should be from any region or industry sector. We think that the ISO board and the EIM governing body are best positioned to make those decisions based on consideration of a full list of candidates that stakeholder sectors have brought forward. This will allow the EIM governing body and the board to weigh these considerations along with other factors that will be critical for the success of the GRC, such as ensuring that the GRC as a whole has the right mix of skills and experience to address the topics it will be considering. We also think that this approach is best because we're not asking each member of the GRC to represent the interests of a given sector or region. Members are instead asked to work collaboratively to develop a proposal that will widely be acceptable to stakeholders in general. Based on stakeholder input, the GRC will receive through the comments on its proposals. This is the same approach that we used for the Transitional Committee, which was able to develop a consensus proposal that enjoyed wide stakeholder support. We'll move to slide number 7 on the scope of work of the GRC. The GRC's scope of work will be limited to EIM governance. Specifically, the GRC will be asked to consider and develop any proposed refinements or enhancements to the existing structure based on stakeholder input and experience with how the current governance has functioned to date. This may include considering any revisions needed to accommodate an extended day-ahead market if that option is added to the current EIM market. EDM-related governance issues will be considered only if the EDM feasibility assessment that is currently underway generates sufficient interest to start a separate stakeholder process to develop the EDM market design. The draft charter does not set a hard limit for how long the GRC will take to complete this work. However, we initially contemplate that this would be a period of approximately 6 to 8 months. And the GRC will be a temporary committee and will disband once it has completed its work. On to slide number 8 now. We'll give you a process overview. This is a graphical representation of the process. As you can see, back in December, the EIM governing body initiated the charter-mandated review. In March here, we had some initial discussions with both the EIM governing body and the ISO Board of Governors. We posted on April 1st the GRC proposal, and we're going to be open to stakeholder comments and revisions now. The next step that we would envision would be a decision by the EIM governing body and the ISO Board of Governors on the charter to establish this committee. Then the stakeholders will go through their sector nomination process to appoint members to that committee. And then last but not least, the GRC will commence the work. Are there any questions on the process at this point?
So if you do have a question, you can raise your hand by pressing #2, and we ask that you introduce yourself first. And Noreen, how many people do we have on the phone?
We have 56 people dialed in.
Great, thank you. So if you could just let me know if anybody enters the queue, that would be great.
Sure. At this time, we just got a question.
Okay.
Caller, please go ahead.
Hi, this is Raisa Ledesma from the CPUC. You mentioned kind of the next step after the stakeholder comments, and final proposal would go straight to the EIM governing body and the Board of Governors. Is that going to be staggered, or are you assuming that it'll just go at the same time? Sorry, that wasn't very clear. I guess I'm asking a little bit about timing. Would we expect to see this at the next Board of Governors meeting?
This is Stacey Crowley. I think generally we want to get the benefit of the comments that come in from stakeholders on April 29th to see sort of the breadth and the type of comments and suggestions that stakeholders make before we really set a schedule forward to understand when this could be brought before both bodies. If we do have a significant amount of comments, we might have to go through another paper, a revised proposal, and that would take some time. So we're not at this point, we don't want to commit to any particular date or any established meeting until we do get those comments back. However, to answer a part of your question, the intention is to have this be a joint decision by both bodies at a single meeting or session.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Noreen?
Yes, we do have another one. Caller, please go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me? This is Laura Trelease.
Yeah, hi, Laura.
Hi, Laura Trelease with Public Generating Pool. I had a question back on slide 6 about the composition of the GRC. You had mentioned that there'd be one member from the EIM governing body and one from the ISO Board of Governors. And as I saw that, I just was curious, maybe some of the context behind why having them as a member of the committee rather than maybe as like an advisory type role where the GRC could check in at each checkpoint or something like that. So I was just curious maybe some of the context behind putting them on the actual GRC.
Right. This is Bert Gross. Definitely, there are multiple ways that this could be done. I think the idea or the goal is to sort of make sure that we have a good way to keep the board and the EIM governing body abreast of the developments and understand the context in which the overall committee is making decisions, and also to be able to stay pretty closely engaged in the process. So that's what's been proposed. But if parties have comments on that, that's certainly something that we'd be interested in hearing about.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I just found it maybe odd to have them as part of the committee that develops the actual proposals, but I understand they need to be involved somehow. It was just sort of the way it was selected, so I appreciate that response.
Thank you, Laura. Any other questions, Noreen?
We don't have any other questions.
Okay, we'll go ahead and move on.
So thank you for those questions. And now we'd like to switch to the nomination and ranking process here on slide 9 of the presentation. To identify and rank potential candidates for the GRC, we propose a process that is very similar to what was done to establish the transitional committee. Stakeholders who are interested in identifying ranking candidates will participate within one of 5 stakeholder sectors. And those stakeholder sectors are EIM entities, the participating transmission owners, publicly owned utilities, suppliers and marketers of generation and energy service providers, and the 5th would be the public interest and consumer advocates. The detailed definitions for each of these sectors are set forth in the paper and in the draft charter. It bears mention that the sector definitions are, with one exception, the same as currently used to nominate potential candidates for the EIM governing body. The one exception is that we've broadened several of the categories somewhat to include a balancing authority or entities within a balancing authority that hasn't yet committed to EIM but has entered into a formal public process to consider joining it. We did this to ensure that an entity that needs to go through a formal process before making a commitment to join the EIM can participate in the GRC selection process. We decided to generally follow the EIM sector definitions because they seem to work well in the context of matters of interest to the entirety of the EIM footprint. Using these sector definitions also makes it easier to start up the sector process because there are already individuals who have served as sector liaisons in the context of the EIM governing body selection process. Those existing sector liaisons would set up the initial calls for their respective sectors to begin the process of each sector identifying potential candidates. Once the sectors have commenced the process, the sectors would then decide how to manage the process of identifying and then ranking the potential candidates. These sectors will then engage in a 2-step process. The first step will be to come up with at least 3 nominees for the GRC. The candidates must be individuals who have expressed a willingness to participate, And although a sector can nominate people who work for entities that are within that sector, they can also nominate people who are not within the sector. The candidates each sector identifies will be compiled into an overall list. The second step is the ranking process. For this step, each sector will rank in numerical order the candidates on the overall list. The sectors will be encouraged to rank all of the candidates on the list, but at a minimum must rank their top 12 selections. We'll go to slide 10 here. Shows the process. This list will then be used by both the EIM governing body and the ISO board to select the membership of the Governance Review Committee. This is the same basic process as was used to select the Transitional Committee, with the exception that at that time, the decision on who to select off the list was made just by the board alone, since the EIM governing body did not yet exist. So both bodies will now jointly decide the membership of the GRC. Slide 11, please. Now we'll talk about the GRC operation. The last few pages of the charter describe in detail how the GRC will operate. These are the same basic processes applied to the Transitional Committee. We won't go through all of the details at this time, but I wanted to make sure that there were a few points that we wanted to highlight for you. The first is that all of the meetings of the GRC will be conducted in accordance with the public notice and open meeting requirements set forth in the ISO's existing open meeting policy. The members of the GRC will participate on a voluntary basis and will not receive any compensation or reimbursement. The ISO will designate a staff liaison to the committee. The liaison will be responsible for ensuring that the GRC has all the administrative and other support that it may need. The GRC will be charged with developing, if at all possible, a consensus proposal that all of the members of the GRC support. If unable to come up with a unanimous proposal, the GRC will be allowed to put forth a majority proposal with potential alternatives supported by a minority. But any alternatives must have the support of at least 3 members to be included as an alternative. When it has completed the process, the GRC will submit the proposal to the EIM governing body and the ISO board for review and consideration. And then we'll go on to slide 12. As noted in the April 1st paper, we're asking stakeholders to submit any comments to the proposal by no later than April 29th. We're hoping to finalize this proposal and put it before the EIM governing body and the ISO board in the late May to early June timeframe. But like Stacy has mentioned previously, we'll have a much better idea of the timing and next steps after we've had a chance to review any input we've received by April 29th. And thank you for that. And with that, I'd like to open it up for any additional questions.
Yeah, so again, if you do have any questions, you can raise your hand by pressing pound 2.
We do have 2 questions.
Okay.
Mother, please go ahead.
Hi there, this was Allie Coslow from Arizona Public Service. Thank you all for putting this proposal out and for having this call today. I did have one question back on slide 10 of the deck regarding the sector definitions. Peter, you mentioned that you had broadened the EIM sector to include those that were doing a public stakeholder process in order for them to still be able to participate. I'm just a little bit confused because I don't know why they wouldn't be able to participate in the sector that they otherwise would be classified under. So if you could explain a little bit your thinking there, that would be really appreciated.
This is Bert Gross. Maybe I can take it and if others want to jump in. So, the sectors are defined by industry types, but then also by I guess the extent of their involvement and commitment to the existing EIM or not. So, for example, the EIM entities category includes all existing EIM entities as well as all EIM entities who have signed an implementation agreement to become an EIM entity. But then there's also, the potential, there are other entities, and the one, frankly, that comes to mind is Bonneville, who have a public process that they need to undertake or are in the process of undertaking to determine whether to become an EIM entity. And so, that definition was intended to give a little bit more breadth to the sectors. But candidly, I think the thought is that it should not just be anybody in the entirety of the West who's in those sectors who would provide input. We're trying to sort of make sure that the people who are providing input are the people who are sort of either in the existing market or on the precipice of being in the existing market.
Okay, thank you so much for that explanation.
Okay.
Okay, next question, Maureen.
Next caller, please go ahead.
Hi, it's Fred Hewitt, Northwest Energy Coalition. So thanks for all the explanation and all the materials. It's very helpful to get a pretty detailed look at this. One thing that wasn't covered in the slides, but relating to the scope of work, in the draft committee charter, notes that in the event that day-ahead market is added to the current EIM market structure, i.e. an extended day-ahead market EDAM, that latter issue will be included within the GRC scope if the current feasibility assessment for an EDAM market produces a positive outcome, resulting in the commencement of a separate stakeholder process to develop an EDAM design. Now, our organization and many of the other advocates in the West very avidly interested in having a good EDAM process moving forward, but the timing here is a bit tricky because the GRC, the projected GRC process would be completed probably, either very early in the stages or maybe not even at the beginning of the formal process, of the new formal process, should that go forward. So I just wanted to raise that issue because if commencement of a separate stakeholder process actually occurred during the period the GRC is active or, imminently thereafter, then the GRC would be faced with a kind of a conundrum of what to do about that. So I think that there should be some thought given to either, an extension or maybe a kind of a reopener or second phase to the GRC, without having to go back and start all over again, because the timing of these two processes, it's not entirely clear right now.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Maureen, do we have any other questions or comments?
We don't have any other questions.
All right. Well, we look forward to your comments on April 29th. You can send those to the initiative comments at KISO.com mailbox. Again, we did record today's meeting. We are going to make that recording available to you out on the Western EIM website on the initiatives page. So, Peter, did you have a last?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Christina. And we just wanted to reiterate that we are looking forward for comments from stakeholders on all the different aspects of the charter and the proposal. We know that there were some great issues that were shared today, and we look forward to a lot of the comments and feedback from stakeholders on all these, both the charter and proposal. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. So any last questions, Noreen? Anybody in the queue?
Please press #2 on your telephone keypad if you wish to ask a question. We don't have any questions at this time.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your participation in today's call and look forward to your comments. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Maureen.
My pleasure. That concludes our conference. Thank you for using AT&T Event Conferencing Enhanced. You may now disconnect.